The bad men took possession of Tombstone. They came from all over the West. For railroads and telegraph lines were bringing a new order of things from the Missouri to the Rio Grande. And those who would live by the 45 hastened to ride away from sight of jails and churches, seeking this new haven down by the border. The bad men mingled with the sidewalk throngs. They dropped into the birdcage opera house, where painted women sang in voices that clanged like brazen gongs. They took their places before the gambling tables of the Crystal Palace, where girls were oftentimes to be found dealing faro. They joined the long lines before the bars and drank the stinging whiskey which the wagon trains had brought from Tucson. And they met one another. They rustled stock. They drove whole herds over the boundary from Mexico. They pillaged the ranches which were now coming into the adjacent country, stealing horses, altering brands, and slaying whoever interfered with them, all with the boldness of medieval raiders. They took a hand in the claim jumping. They robbed the stage. Hardly a day passed without a hold-up on the Tucson Road. And when the railway went through, on the road to Benson, shotgun guards and drivers were killed. Occasionally, a passenger or two got a bullet, and the bad men spent the money openly over the bars in Tombstone. Then, the Earp brothers came upon the scene. From this time, their figures loom large in the foreground. Whatever else may be said of them, they were bold men, and there was something Homeric in their violence. Wyatt, Virgil, Morgan. They arrived in Tombstone in the days when the outlaws were rampant, and they began dealing faro in Oriental.
I was asked to go to Tombstone in my capacity as United States Marshal, and went. My brother Wyatt and myself were fairly well treated for a time, but when the desperate characters who were congregated there and who had been accustomed to troublesome molestation by the authorities learnt that we meant business and determined to stop the rascality, if possible, they began to make it warm for us.
And so the scene was set for a confrontation that would echo through dime novels, television, comic books, and movies for over 130 years and counting. A confrontation that wouldn't end in the famous, if misnamed, gunfight at the OK Corral, but would continue on a bloody path of assassinations, backshooting, and vigilante justice. The dark side of the lawmen of the West. The Earp brothers, Wyatt, Virgil, and Morgan, were lawmen who had served in various parts of the western frontier. When they arrived in Tombstone, Arizona, Virgil was a deputy U.S. Marshal. In October 1880, Virgil became the Tombstone town marshal as well. The previous town marshal had been shot dead in the street. Wyatt had tired of the life of a peace officer after his time in Dodge City and Wichita. But soon he was serving as a deputy sheriff of Tombstone. And both he and Morgan would serve as special duty officers under Virgil. The roles of the town, county, and federal lawmen intertwined and overlapped within the Earp family. Also intertwined in all of this was local politics. Tombstone was divided between two groups. The businessmen, who were law and order types, were largely Republican. This group included the Earps. The wilder men in town, which included the cowboys, among others, were resentful of the structures put in place by the government. They were often Confederate veterans of the Civil War, and they voted Democrat. In these early decades, after the Civil War, the Republicans were truly the party of Lincoln and Ulysses S. Grant. Reconstruction had ended in 1877, and federal troops had only recently been removed from southern states. Meanwhile, the Democrats were still largely the party of the white, formerly Confederate, South. Throughout these early years after the war, Republican officials in the South were threatened and assassinated by rebellious paramilitary groups, such as the Ku Klux Klan. In the South, these groups served as post-war, unreconstructed military units aligned with the Democrats. All of which is to say, politics was a deadly, serious business. In Tombstone, this meant that while the Earps were trying to enforce law and order within the town, they were also dealing with a political element that was unofficially supportive of the cowboys. Wyatt Earp was actually initially made deputy sheriff of Pima County by Democrat Sheriff Charles Chabelle. But in the next election, a few months later, Wyatt supported the Republican candidate. When Chabelle was reelected, Wyatt resigned as deputy sheriff. Chabelle replaced him with the well-connected, politically savvy Democrat Johnny Bean. Months later, the election would be overturned due to election fraud by Chabelle. But by this time, Pima County had split, and Tombstone was now in the new Cochise County. Wyatt now had an opportunity to be appointed sheriff of Cochise County, and his competition was Johnny Bean. This was a highly sought-after position because the sheriff's duties included collecting taxes and fees, and the sheriff kept 10% of whatever he collected. Johnny Bean told Wyatt that if Wyatt withdrew from consideration, Bean would make Wyatt his under-sheriff, second in command. However, when Bean was appointed sheriff, he reneged on his deal. Bean may have changed his mind because he and Earp were in competition for the same mistress, a young actress named Josephine Marcus, more commonly called Sadie. But it's not known when Wyatt's relationship with Sadie began. As sheriff, Bean actually hired members of the Cowboys gang. Frank Stillwell, who had been twice arrested, though not convicted, of murder, was his deputy sheriff until being terminated for accounting irregularities. Not long before the gunfight near the OK Corral, he would be arrested for robbing a stagecoach. Curly Bill Brocious, who had gunned down the previous town marshal in what was ruled an accidental shooting, was made a tax collector by Bean. The Earps, on the other hand, had an adversarial relationship with the Cowboys from the start. Virgil Earp's original mission in Tombstone was to reduce the robberies of the stagecoaches to and from the town, and the Cowboys were known to be involved. Wyatt's initial involvement with the Cowboys was more personal. Within a few days of his arrival in Tombstone, one of his horses was stolen by Billy Clanton, who, along with his brother Ike, was a member of the outlaw gang. Wyatt eventually recovered the horse, but he would continue to have problems with the Clantons. One particular incident began with a stagecoach robbery and murder.
Arizona Weekly Citizen, March 20th, 1881. The robbers fired into the stage, and the driver, Bud Philpott, was killed and one passenger mortally wounded. The stage was going up a small incline when a man stepped out on each side of the road and called, "Hold." At the same instant, one fired. Then the man on the other side of the road fired.
The Wells Fargo shotgun messenger on board the stagecoach, Bob Paul, shouted, "I don't halt for nobody," and fired his shotgun toward the voices.
The driver fell forward and down between the wheelers, supposed to be killed. The horses jumped into a dead run on the first fire. The reins falling from the driver's hands, they ran nearly a mile before they could be stopped. This saved the stage from robbery and saved Wells Fargo and Company treasure. Paul brought the stage onto Benson with the wounded man, who has since died. It is not known yet whether the robbers are shot. Detective Paul has returned to the scene of the robbery. There were 8 or 9 passengers on the stage, but none others injured.
Wyatt and Virgil Earp, along with the stagecoach detective Paul and Sheriff Johnny Bean, led the posse that chased after the outlaws. But they were unsuccessful in tracking them down. Wyatt then tried a different strategy, as he testified later.
As a detective, I helped trace the matter up, and I was satisfied that 3 men named Billy Leonard, Harry Head, and James Crane were in that robbery. I knew that Leonard, Head, and Crane were friends and associates of the Clantons and McClurys and often stopped at their ranches. It was generally understood among officers and those who have information about criminals that Ike Clanton was sort of a chief among the cowboys, that the Clantons and McClurys were cattle thieves and generally in the secret of the stage robbery, and that the Clanton and McClury ranches were meeting places and places of shelter for the gang. I had an ambition to be sheriff of this county at the next election, and I thought it would be a great help to me with the people and businessmen if I could capture the men who killed Philpott. There were rewards offered of about $1,200 each for the capture of the robbers. Altogether, there was about $3,600 offered for their capture. I thought this sum might tempt Ike Clanton and Frank McClury to give away Leonard, Head, and Crane, so I went to Ike Clanton, Frank McClury, and Joe Hill when they came to town. I had an interview with them in the backyard of the Oriental Saloon. I told them I wanted the glory of capturing Leonard, Head, and Crane, and if I could do it, it would help me make the race for sheriff at the next election. I told them if they would put me on the track of Leonard, Head, and Crane and tell me where those men were hid, I would give them all the reward and would never let anyone know where I got the information. Ike Clanton said he would like to see them captured. He said that Leonard claimed a ranch that he claimed, and that if he could get him out of the way, he would have no opposition in regard to the ranch. Clanton said that Leonard, Head, and Crane would make a fight, that they would never be taken alive, and that I must find out if the reward would be paid for the capture of the robbers, dead or alive.
Wyatt contacted the Wells Fargo agent in Tombstone, Marshall Williams, who was able to verify that the reward would be paid, dead or alive.
It was then agreed between us that they were to have all the $3,600 reward, and that Joe Hill should go and lure them in near Frank and Tom McClury's ranch near Soldiers' Holes, 30 miles from here, and I would be on hand with a posse and capture them. Ike Clanton then sent Joe Hill to bring them in. He was gone about 10 days and returned with the word that he got there a day too late. That Leonard and Harry Head had been killed the day before we got there by horse thieves. I learned afterward that the thieves had been killed subsequently by members of the Clanton and McClury gang. After that, Ike Clanton and Frank McClury claimed that I had given them away to Marshall Williams and Doc Holliday, and when they came in town, they shunned us, and Morgan, Virgil, Earp, Doc Holliday, and myself began to hear their threats against us.
Wyatt believed that this incident, and Ike Clanton's fear that Wyatt would reveal to the cowboys that Ike had squealed on some of their number, ramped up the tension between the Clantons and McLaurys on one side and the Earps and Doc Holliday on the other. Doc Holliday was an unusual character, and it is hard to separate truth from legend in his story.
There was something very peculiar about Doc. He was gentlemanly, a good dentist, a friendly man, and yet outside of us boys, I don't think he had a friend in the territory. Tales were told that he had murdered men in different parts of the country, that he had robbed and committed all manner of crimes, and yet when persons were asked how they knew it, they could only admit that it was hearsay, and that nothing of the kind could really be traced up to Doc's account. He was a slender, sickly fellow, but whenever a stage was robbed or a row started and help was needed, Doc was one of the first to saddle his horse and report for duty.
In fact, Doc Holliday, despite suffering from tuberculosis, was part of the posse that spent weeks in the field hunting Bud Philpott's killers. But Holliday also had a fiery temper and was a heavy drinker. If Ike believed that Wyatt had told Holliday about Ike making a deal to sell out fellow cowboys, he would have been understandably nervous about the truth escaping Doc's lips.
Ike Clanton met me at the Alhambra Saloon and told me I had told Holliday about this transaction concerning the capture of Head, Leonard, and Crane. I told him I had never told Holliday anything. I told him when Holliday came up from Tucson, I would prove it. On the night of the 25th of October, Holliday met Ike Clanton in the Alhambra Saloon and asked him about it. Clanton denied it. They quarreled for 3 or 4 minutes. Holliday told Clanton he was a damned liar. I was sitting eating lunch at the lunch counter. Morgan Earp was standing at the Alhambra bar talking with the bartender. I called him over to where I was sitting, knowing that he was an officer, and told him that Holliday and Clanton were quarreling in the lunchroom and for him to go in and stop it. He climbed over the lunchroom counter from the Alhambra bar and went into the room, took Holliday by the arm and led him into the street. Ike Clanton, in a few seconds, followed them out. I got through eating and walked out of the bar. As I stopped at the door of the bar, they were still quarreling. Just then, Virgil Earp came up and told them Holliday and Clanton, if they didn't stop their quarreling, he would have to arrest them. They all separated at that time, Morgan going down the street to the Oriental Saloon, Ike going across the street to the Grand Hotel.
But Ike wasn't quite willing to let the issue drop.
I walked in the Eagle Brewery where I had a faro game which I had not closed. I stayed in there for a few minutes and walked out to the street and there met Ike Clanton. He asked me if I would take a walk with him, that he wanted to talk to me. I told him I would if he did not go too far, as I was waiting for my game in the brewery to close and I would have to take care of the money. He told me when Holliday approached him in the Alhambra that he wasn't fixed just right.
By fixed, Ike meant armed.
He said that in the morning he would have man for man, that this fighting talk had been going on for a long time, and he guessed it was about time to fetch it to a close. I told him I would not fight no one if I could get away from it, because there was no money in it. He walked off and left me saying, "I will be ready for you in the morning." I walked over to the Oriental. He followed me in and took a drink. Having his 6-shooter in plain sight, he says, "You must not think I won't be after you all in the morning." He said he would like to make a fight with Holliday now. I told him Holliday did not want to fight, but only to satisfy him that this talk had not been made. About that time, the man that is dealing my game closed it and brought the money to me. I locked it in the safe and started home. I met Holliday on the street between the Oriental and Alhambra. Myself and Holliday walked down Allen Street. he going to his room and I to my house, going to bed.
But though Wyatt may have been done for the night, Ike was not. He continued drinking and storming all night and into the dawn.
On the morning of the 26th, somewhere about 6 or 7 o'clock, I started to go home, and Ike Clanton stopped me and wanted to know if I would carry a message from him to Doc Holliday. I asked him what it was. He said, "The damned son of a bitch has got to fight." I said, "Ike, I am an officer and I don't want to hear you talking that way at all. I am going down home now to go to bed. I don't want you to raise any disturbance while I am in bed." I started to go home, and when I got 10 feet from him, he said, "You won't carry the message?" I said, "No, of course I won't." I made 4 or 5 steps more. He said, "You may have to fight before you know it." I made no reply to him and went home and went to bed. I don't know how long I had been in bed. It must have been between 9 and 10 o'clock when one of the policemen came and told me to get up, as there was liable to be hell.
I got up the next day, October 26th, about noon. Before I got up, Ned Boyle came to me and told me that he met Ike Clanton on Allen Street near the telegraph office, that Ike was armed, that he said, "As soon as those damned Earps make their appearance on the street today, the ball will open. We are here to make a fight. We are looking for the sons of bitches." I laid in bed some little time after that, and got up and went down to the Oriental Saloon. Harry Jones came to me after I got up and said, "What does all this mean?" I asked him what he meant. He says, "Ike Clanton is hunting you boys with a Winchester rifle and 6-shooter. I said, "I will go down and find him and see what he wants." I went out, and on the corner of 5th and Allen I met Virgil. He told me how he heard Ike Clanton was hunting us. I went down Allen Street, and Virgil went down 5th Street and then Fremont Street. Virgil found Ike Clanton on 4th Street near Fremont Street in the mouth of an alleyway. I walked up to him and said, "I hear you were hunting for some of us." I was coming down 4th Street at the time. Ike Clanton then threw his Winchester rifle around toward Virgil. Virgil grabbed it and hit Ike Clanton with his 6-shooter and knocked him down. Clanton had his rifle and his 6-shooter was in his pants. By that time I came up. Virgil and Morgan took his rifle and the 6-shooter and took them to the Grand Hotel after examination, and I took Ike Clanton before Justice Wallace. After I went into Wallace's court and sat down on a bench, Ike Clanton looked over to me and said, "I will get even with all of you for this. If I had a 6-shooter now, I would make a fight with all of you."
The Earp's patience was wearing thin.
Morgan then said to him, "If you want to make a fight right bad, I will give you this one," at the same time offering Ike Clanton his own 6-shooter. Ike Clanton started to get up and take it when Campbell, the deputy sheriff, pushed him back in his seat, saying he would not allow any fuss. I was tired of being threatened by Ike Clanton and his gang, and believed from what he said to me and others and from their movements that they intended to assassinate me the first chance they had, and I thought that if I had to fight for my life with them, I had better make them face me in an open fight. So I said to Ike Clanton, who was then sitting about 8 feet away from me, "You damn dirty cow thief, you have been threatening our lives, and I know it. I think I would be justified in shooting you down any place I should meet you, but if you are anxious to make a fight, I will go anywhere on earth to make a fight with you, even over to the San Simeon among your crowd." He replied, "I will see you after I get through here. I only want 4 feet of ground to fight on."
Tensions had risen higher than ever, and they were about to spread to other members of the cowboy gang.
I walked out, and then just outside of the courtroom near the justice's office, I met Tom McClary. He came up to me and said to me, "If you want to make a fight, I will make a fight with you anywhere." I supposed at the time that he had heard what had just transpired between Ike Clanton and myself. I knew of his having threatened me, and I felt just as I did about Ike Clanton, and if the fight had to come, I had better have it come when I had an even show to defend myself. So I said to him, "All right, make a fight right here," and at the same time slapped him in the face with my left hand and drew my pistol with my right. He had a pistol in plain sight on his right hip in his pants, but made no move to draw it. I said to him, "Jerk your gun and use it."
Although Wyatt insisted that Tom McClory was wearing a pistol, at least one other witness reported that McClory was unarmed.
He made no reply, and I hit him on the head with my six-shooter and walked away, down to Hanford's corner. I went into Hanford's and got a cigar and came out and stood by the door. Pretty soon after, I saw Tom McClary, Frank McClary, and William Clanton pass me and went down 4th Street to the gunsmith shop. I followed them to see what they were going to do. When I got there, Frank McClory's horse was standing on the sidewalk with his head in the door of the gun shop. I took the horse by the bit, as I was deputy city marshal, and commenced to back him off the sidewalk. Tom and Frank and Billy Clanton came to the door. Billy Clanton laid his hand on his six-shooter. Frank McClory took hold of the horse's bridle, and I said, "You will have to get this horse off the sidewalk." He backed him off into the street. Ike Clanton came up about this time, and they all walked into the gun shop. I saw them in the gun shop changing cartridges into their belts.
Within just a few hours' time, Virgil and Wyatt Earp had buffaloed both Ike Clanton and Tom McClory, cracking them across the skull with their heavy pistols. While this treatment might seem rough, Earp historian Alfred E. Turner notes that the experience demonstrates that Wyatt and Virgil did not kill when alternatives, such as buffaloing, could be successful. Given a chance, Wyatt and Virgil would have arrested and not killed the Clantons and McClorys. But regardless of what they would have preferred, the Earps were fast approaching the gunfight that would make them famous.
Virgil was city marshal, Morgan was a special policeman for 6 weeks or 2 months, wore a badge, and drew pay. I had been sworn in Virgil's place to act for him while Virgil was gone to Tucson for a trial. Virgil had been back several days, but I was still acting, and I knew it was Virgil's duty to disarm those men. I expected he would have trouble in doing so, and I followed up to give assistance if necessary. About 10 minutes afterwards, and while Virgil, Morgan, Doc Holliday, and myself were standing in the center of 4th and Allen Streets, several persons said, "There is going to be trouble with those fellows," and one man named Coleman said to Virgil Earp, "They mean trouble. They have just gone from Dunbar's Corral into the OK Corral, all armed. I think you'd better go and disarm them." Virgil turned around to Doc Holliday, Morgan, and myself and told us to come and assist him in disarming them.
But first, Virgil called to Sheriff Johnny Behan for assistance in disarming the cowboys. Behan said that if Virgil was with him, it would turn into a fight, but that he would go alone to see if he could disarm them.
I told him that was all I wanted them to do, to lay off their arms while they were in town. Shortly after he left, I was notified that they were on Fremont Street, and I called on Wyatt and Morgan Earp and Doc Holliday to go help me disarm the Clantons and McLaurys. We started down 4th Street to Fremont, turned down Fremont West towards Fly's lodging house. When we got about somewhere by Bauer's butcher shop, I saw the parties before we got there, in a vacant lot between the photograph gallery and the house west of it. The parties were Ike and Billy Clanton, Tom and Frank McLaury, Johnny Behan. Johnny Behan seen myself and party coming towards them. He left the Clanton and McLaury party and came on a fast walk towards us, and once in a while he would look behind at the party he left. as though expecting danger of some kind. He met us somewhere close to the butcher shop. He threw up both hands and said, "For God's sake, don't go there, or they will murder you." I said, "Johnny, I am going down to disarm them." By this time, I had passed him a step and heard him say, "I have disarmed them all." When he said that, I had a walking stick in my left hand, and my right hand was on my six-shooter. And when he said he had disarmed them, I shoved it clean around my left hip and changed my walking stick to my right hand.
Like his brother, Wyatt also relaxed a bit when he heard that Johnny Boone had reported that he had disarmed the Clantons and McClorys already.
When he said this, I took my pistol, which I had in my hand under my coat, and put it in my overcoat pocket. Behan then passed up the street, and we walked on down.
The Tombstone Nugget, one of the local papers, reported what happened next.
October 27, 1881. When within a few feet of them, the marshal said to the Clantons and McLowrys, "Throw up your hands, boys. I intend to disarm you." As he spoke, Frank McLowry made a motion to draw his revolver when Wyatt Earp pulled his and shot him, the ball striking on the right side of his abdomen. About the same time, Doc Holliday shot Tom McLowry in the right side using a short shotgun, such as is carried by Wells Fargo and Company's messengers. In the meantime, Billy Clanton had shot at Morgan Earp, the ball passing through the point of the left shoulder blade across his back, just grazing the backbone and coming out at the shoulder, the ball remaining inside of his shirt. He fell to the ground, but in an instant gathered himself and, raising in a sitting position, fired at Frank McLowry as he crossed Fremont Street, and at the same instant, Doc Holliday shot at him, both balls taking effect, either of which would have proved fatal, as one struck him in the right temple and the other in the left breast. While this was going on, Billy Clanton had shot Virgil Earp in the right leg, the ball passing through the calf, inflicting a severe flesh wound. In turn, he had been shot by Morgan Earp in the right side of the abdomen and twice by Virgil Earp, once in the right wrist and once in the left breast. Soon after the shooting commenced, Ike Clanton ran through the OK Corral, across Allen Street into Kellogg's saloon, and thence through Toughnut Street, where he was arrested and taken to the county jail. The firing altogether didn't occupy more than 25 seconds, during which time fully 30 shots were fired.
According to R.F. Coleman, a witness to the event, immediately after the firing, Sheriff Boone tried to arrest the Earps. Wyatt replied,
"I won't be arrested today. I'm right here and am not going away. You have deceived me. You told me these men were disarmed. I went to disarm them."
Tom and Frank McClory and Billy Clanton all died from their wounds. Virgil and Morgan recovered, but they, Wyatt and Doc Holliday, stood trial for murder. In the trial, there were varying reports regarding whether Ike Clanton and Tom McClory were armed, though even the cowboy supporters did not dispute that Frank McClory and Billy Clanton carried guns. Morgan's and Virgil's wounds made that clear. There was also debate over who shot first, with some saying it was Frank, others saying it was Morgan or Doc. In the end, Judge Wells Spice, a friend of Wyatt's, ruled that the evidence indicated that the Earps and Doc Holliday had acted within the law. But in the eyes of the cowboys and their friends, and there were many in and around Tombstone, the Earps had gotten away with murder. This would not be the end. December 28th, 1881, 2 months after the gunfight.
Arizona Weekly Citizen, January 1, 1882. As Deputy United States Marshal Virgil Earp was crossing 5th Street, an attempt was made to assassinate him. 5 shots were fired in rapid succession from shotguns loaded with buckshot. It is thought 3 men did the shooting. They were concealed in a vacant building the opposite side of Allen Street. Immediately after having fired, they ran through the rear of the building and disappeared in the darkness. Earp was wounded in the left arm, just above the elbow, fracturing the bone. He also received a shot above the groin, the shot coming out near the spine. The wounds are very dangerous, probably mortal.
Fortunately, Virgil did survive those wounds, though he never regained use of his left arm. Wyatt quickly telegraphed the U.S. Marshal in Phoenix, Crawley Dake, to tell him what had happened. Dake was the marshal who had deputized Virgil years earlier. Dake responded by appointing Wyatt Deputy U.S. Marshal, with the power to appoint his own deputies as well. Wyatt formed a posse, which included Morgan, their younger brother, Warren Earp, Doc Holliday, and a collection of tough men with colorful names. Jack Turkey Creek Johnson, Texas Jack Vermillion, Tip Tipton, and Hairlip Charlie Smith. Also deputized by Wyatt was Sherman McMaster, a former Texas Ranger and also a former compatriot of the Cowboys. The posse was able to eventually track down Ike Clanton and his brother Phineas, called Finn, who were believed to be involved in the assassination attempt on Virgil. The charges were dismissed for insufficient evidence, and Wyatt later claimed that the judge told him, "Wyatt, you'll never clean up this crowd this way. Next time, you'd better leave your prisoners in the brush, where alibis don't count." Not long after, Morgan Earp was shot in the back, killed while shooting pool. A coroner's inquest identified the prime suspects as Frank Stillwell, Johnny Behan's former deputy, and 4 other men. Wyatt likely had the judge's advice in mind as he took his next actions. Wyatt sent Morgan's body to their parents' home in Colton, California. Virgil and their families, including Wyatt's common-law wife, Maddie, traveled on the same train out of Tucson. Wyatt later said in an interview,
"But even at the depot, I was forced to fight Ike Clanton and 4 or 5 of his friends who had followed us to do murder. One of them, named Frank Stillwell, who was believed to be Morgan's murderer, was killed by my gun going off when he grasped it."
Wyatt's version of Stillwell's death doesn't quite conform to the condition of Stillwell's body when it was found.
Arizona Sentinel, March 25th, 1882. Frank Stillwell, aged about 26 years, was murdered near the depot at Tucson. 1 load of 7 buckshot penetrated his left breast and, ranging downward, passed out his back. And a pistol shot took effect in the fleshy part of the left arm, entered the body just below the armpit, passed directly through the body, and came out under the left arm in which it lodged.
Virgil, in writing about the event, didn't try to call the killing of Stillwell an accident.
When my brothers were leaving Arizona, they got dispatches from Tucson saying that Stillwell and a party of friends were watching all the railroad trains passing that way, and they were going through them in search of all Earps and their friends, carrying shotguns under their overcoats and promising to kill on sight. Our boys were bound to look out for themselves, and when they got near Tucson, were very cautious. They found Stillwell near the track and killed him. Before Stillwell died, he confessed that he had killed Morg and gave the names of those who were implicated with him.
Wyatt Earp had long been willing to use brute force to put a dangerous man down, but in the past, he had tried to avoid killing. With the murder of his brother, he had been pushed too far.
When I returned to Tombstone, Sheriff Behan came to arrest me, but I refused to surrender and he weakened. For a long time thereafter, I occupied the anomalous position of being a fugitive from the county authorities and performing the duties of Deputy United States Marshal with the sanction and moral support of my chief. With Doc Holliday and one or two faithful comrades, I went into camp among the hills and withstood more than one attack from outlaws who had been implicated in the death of one brother and the disablement of another, attacks which resulted fatally to some of my enemies and left me without a scratch.
Over the next few weeks, as Wyatt and his posse hunted cowboys, Behan and his posse, which included a number of newly deputized cowboys, hunted Wyatt. Wyatt and his men were federal deputies with an enormous jurisdiction. Behan's jurisdiction was limited to Cochise County, which did not even include the site of Stillwell's murder, but that did not stop Behan. As the Arizona Weekly Citizen noted in its pages, after the failed assassination's attempt on Virgil and the successful killing of Morgan,
for the perpetrators of these crimes, the Immaculate Sheriff of Cochise County did not think it necessary to make any hunt. The Earps then took law into their own hands and, it is supposed, killed Frank Stillwell, a noted stage robber and desperado, and one of the parties whom the coroner's jury held responsible for the murder of Morgan Earp. Then the sheriff of Cochise County aroused. He had lost a vote at the coming election. This murder must be avenged, and with a band of cutthroats at his back and at an expense of about $8,000 to the county, he started his pursuit. No intelligent person in the territory, knowing the sheriff and his posse, wonders that the Earps did not come up and peaceably surrender. The result would undoubtedly have been that they would have shared the fate of their brother Morgan and been murdered in cold blood.
Wyatt's posse found and killed Florentino Cruz, called Indian Charlie, who had been identified in the inquest. Wyatt later claimed that he gave Cruz a gun and ordered him to draw. At any rate, Cruz allegedly implicated a number of cowboys in Morgan's death before he was killed. One of those was Curly Bill Brocious, who had been arrested by Wyatt for the shooting death of a Tombstone marshal, and who had later worked as a tax collector under Sheriff Johnny Behan. Wyatt told the story of facing Curly Bill and a band of cowboys near Iron Springs in the Whetstone Mountains less than a week after Morgan was gunned down in Tombstone.
We had ridden 25 miles over the mountains with the intention of camping at a certain spring. As we got near the place, I had a presentiment that something was wrong and unlimbered my shotgun. Sure enough, 9 cowboys sprang up from the bank where the spring was and began firing at us. I jumped off my horse to return fire, thinking my men would do the same, but they retreated. One of the cowboys, who was trying to pump some lead into me with a Winchester, was a fellow named Curly Bill, a stage robber whom I had been after for 8 months and for whom I had a warrant in my pocket. I fired both barrels of my gun into him, blowing him all to pieces. With that, the others jumped into a clump of willows and kept on firing, so I retreated, keeping behind my horse. He was a high-strung beast, and the firing frightened him so that whenever I tried to get my Winchester, he would rear up and keep it out of my reach. When I had backed out about 100 yards, I started to mount. Now, it was a hot day, and I had loosened my cartridge belt about 2 or 3 holes. When I tried to get astride, I found that it had fallen down over my thighs, keeping my legs together. While I was perched up thus, trying to pull my belt higher with one hand, the horn of the saddle was shot off. However, I got away all right, and just then my men rallied. But I did not care to go back at the rustlers, so we sought out another water hole for camp. The skirt of my overcoat was shot to pieces on both sides, but not a bullet had touched me.
Soon after, Wyatt's federal posse, who all still had warrants for their arrests, broke up, going their separate ways. A couple of months later, Doc Holliday was arrested in Denver, Colorado. Wyatt, afraid Doc would be killed if brought back to Tombstone, contacted his old friend, Bat Masterson.
This happened in the spring of 1882. I was in Denver at the time and managed to secure an audience with Governor Pitkin, who, after listening to my statement in the matter, refused to honor the Arizona requisition for Holliday. I then had a complaint sworn out against Holliday, charging him with having committed a highway robbery in Pueblo, Colorado, and had taken him from Denver to Pueblo, where he was put under a nominal bond and released from custody. The charge of highway robbery made against Holliday at this time was nothing more than a subterfuge on my part to prevent him from being taken out of the state by the Arizona authorities after Governor Pitkin went out of office.
Wyatt Earp lived a long life, dying at the age of 80 in 1929. After Tombstone, he left his common-law wife, Mattie Blaylock, to marry Josephine Marcus, who had once been Johnny Behan's mistress. They would remain together until his death. His story would be told and retold many times. Sometimes he was the knight in shining armor, standing for truth, justice, and the American way against a murderous gang. Sometimes he was just the leader of another outlaw gang, with both sides claiming that the others were the real bad guys. Was U.S. Deputy Marshal Wyatt Earp the lawman whose word should be trusted? Or was Cochise County Sheriff Johnny Behan the one to be believed? The preponderance of evidence seems to come down on the side of the Earps, not as dime novel heroes, but as rough enforcers of law and order. Men who were willing to fight, but had a documented history of using less than lethal force whenever possible. Virgil Earp described their situation.
Concerning the fights between the cowboys and myself and brothers, it has been stated over and over again that there was an old feud between us and some of our enemies, and that we were fighting only to revenge personal wrongs and gratify personal hatred. All such statements are false. We went into Tombstone to do our duty as officers. To do that, we were put in conflict with a band of desperados, and it resolved itself into a question of which side could first drive the other out of the country, or kill them in it.
Such were the lives and deaths of these lawmen of the West.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.